The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the 5th installment of our Food Day Leadership Series. My name is Catherine Castleman. I'm a project coordinator with the Food Day campaign. We're very excited about this presentation today, Making Your Point to the Media. During the presentation, please type your questions into the dashboard and we'll address them at the end of each presentation during the Q&A portion. And this call is going to be recorded, so we'll send around a link to it after the call. If you want to look for other webinars that Food Day hosts or find archived recordings, you can go to www.foodday.org/webinars. And for any questions, please contact us at foodday@cspinet.org. For those of you who are new to Food Day is a nationwide initiative to promote healthy, affordable, and sustainable food and better food policies. It builds year-round and culminates on October 24th every year. It was launched in 2011 by the nonprofit Center for Science in the Public Interest, the publisher of the Nutrition Action Health Letter. Quickly, I wanted to direct everyone to the following URL. Please take note of www.foodday.org/food_literacy_rubric. We're creating a food literacy rubric with Nourish and WorldLink, and we'd love your comments on this rubric as we create it that will help to inform our food education campaign. So please take a moment after the call to visit this link. Today, we have some very special guests. Professor George Lakoff will be presenting on framing and messaging for your food advocacy causes. And the Berkeley Media Studies Group, Ingrid, Daffner, Krasnow, and Lezak, Shallat, will be following up with some practical tips on how you can get more media for your Food Day event. We'll take questions and answers right after each presentation, so please do type those in, and I'll read them out to our presenters. And now I will introduce Professor George Lakoff. He is the Richard and Rhonda Goldman Distinguished Professor of Cognitive Science and Linguistics at the University of California at Berkeley, where he's taught since 1972. George has authored 4 seminal books on politics, including Don't Think of an Elephant, Whose Freedom, Thinking Points, and The Political Mind, which have guided U.S. presidential campaigns and progressive advocacy organizations alike. Since 2008, George has been working on a wide range of framing issues on the environment, healthcare, and much more. So now, George, I'll turn it over to you to present next. Looks like we're having some audio difficulties with George, but he'll be back in just a second. George, if you're there, you might want to enter your audio pin again. It looks like you've gone offline with audio. Okay, he's back now with microphone and speaker. Are you there?
I'm there. My phone went off, so I'm back on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, now you should be able to show your screen, and we'll see your slides.
Okay, is this working? Can you see the screen?
Not quite yet. Oh, now we do.
Now you see it? Okay. Let me make the full screen. And that takes a little minute. Takes a minute here. And there we go. Are we set?
Great. Good to go.
Alrighty. Excellent. So I want to talk a bit about framing and what you need to know about it for Food Day. There'll be general framing at first and then applying it to Food Day after a bit. Basically, you need to know something about the mind and language. 98% of thought is unconscious, and when you think consciously, it's still 98% unconscious. Consciousness is the tip of the iceberg, and the reason for this is that consciousness is linear, but the brain is massively parallel. So what's going on in terms of your thought in your brain is all over the place, and consciousness is a tiny 2% part of that. So you don't know what you're thinking most of the time. None of us do. What we're thinking is in terms of frames, and frames are neural structures used in thinking, and they define how you see the world. So, for example, when I was a kid, if I was to walk by a back alley and I saw a semicircle of people sitting next to a wall, I knew that they were throwing dice against the wall and were gambling. They define how you see the world, what you make of it, and so on. And every word is defined in terms of frames, as we will see. So, frames form a hierarchy. They structure how you understand the world. Higher frames, more dominant ones, dominate lower ones. And moral frames are at the top of this hierarchy. And in politics and social life, all of this is moral. And the reason for this is very simple. If you hear a political representative of yours or anyone making a political speech, they will tell you what they think ought to be done. And the reason is that it's the right thing to do for them. They're never going to say, do it because it's wrong, or do it because it doesn't matter. The assumption is that it's right. The problem is that people have different ideas about what right means. And that's important that we understand that. Conservatives and progressives have opposite moral frames. They don't fit together, as you have noticed, I'm sure, in terms of the country's divide. But many people have both conservative and progressive moral frames, as we will see, and they apply them to different things. You can be progressive on one issue and conservative on other issues, and that's very common. People who are, quote, in the middle are not in the middle. There is no general ideology of the middle. What happens is that they are progressive in some ways and conservative in other ways. And it's important to know that because the frames can be made stronger or weaker, as we can see. So what you'll see is that metaphorical thought governs politics. Political frames arise from family-based frames plus a single conceptual metaphor. That is, because you were raised in a family, your first experience of being governed is in a family, and so you understand governing institutions as families. They can be churches, classrooms, teams, businesses, or the market, or government. And what we have found is that nurturing parent family maps to progressive morality. A strict father family, we'll say what these things are in a minute, maps to conservative morality. And that is really the basic political division in the country. And you'll see in a minute why that's the case. This division gives rise to opposite views of what democracy is. If you're progressive, you believe in public provisions. That is, the government should provide things for everybody and in lots of details, namely provide infrastructure, roads, bridges, public education, public health, research, all sorts of things that are necessary, a power grid, and so on. If you are conservative, you believe in liberty and individual responsibility, and that is a matter of personal responsibility, and that therefore the government should not be providing many of these things. The importance of this is the following. Frames always trump facts. That is, the facts alone won't set you free. If you're telling people just facts by themselves, you need to understand what those facts mean. The reason is, in your brain, your frames are neural circuits. And your neural circuits determine what you can understand and what makes sense to you. If the facts don't fit the frames will stay. That is, the circuits are there. They will stay, and the facts will be ignored or ridiculed. And you see this all the time in public discussions, where progressives will try to say, here are the facts, and conservatives will ignore them or ridicule them. And this is very, very common. Facts are important. The facts matter. And if they're to matter publicly, they have to be framed in terms of your values. If you use the other side's frames, that will just strengthen their values in people's brains. That is, the more a certain frame is used and heard, and therefore it will strengthen the neural circuitry for that, which will strengthen the neural circuitry for those values. So a general advice, avoid the other side's frames. And language evokes frames, so avoid the other side's language. Use your own moral language. The thing to remember is repetition is crucial. Keep saying what you need to say. Say it over and over, then say it over again. If you negate a frame, you activate the frame. I wrote a book called Don't Think of an Elephant. That if I tell you not to think of an elephant, you'll think of an elephant, right? This is very common. And one of the mistakes that progressives often make is trying to argue against conservative framing or the framing of large corporations and so on. And anytime they negate it, they will simply get that frame to come through. They will simply strengthen that frame. So Food Day is an attempt to create new frames in the public, and that's important. Your job is to create new frames, and you need the language for that. Also, experiences are crucial for frame creation. Your job is to provide experiences for people that make those frames believable. And you're going to need narratives not just for good guys, but for bad guys. And there are bad guys. But we'll get to that in a bit. To understand what's going on, you have to understand what a strict father family is and how it projects onto politics. In a strict father family, what happens? The father is the ultimate authority. There's none higher. The authority must be maintained above all. The father is assumed to know right from wrong. Children learn morality by being punished for doing wrong, and punishment is morally required in a strict father family when the kids do wrong. Morality requires discipline in that scene. If you're undisciplined, you can't be moral. The father is there to protect and support the family financially. All responsibility is personal responsibility. You are responsible for yourself and not others. And except that adults are responsible for their children, not for other people's children. Communication is one way. No backtalk. Do what I say, no backtalk. In a nurturing parent family, it's very different. Parents have equal responsibility. Parents use and teach empathy. Empathy is at the heart of it. And responsibility both for yourself, not just personal responsibility, but personal responsibility and social responsibility. Social responsibility for others. They teach that to their children, and they have the responsibility and empathy for their children. Well-being and fulfillment are major goals, not just for parents, but particularly for children. In a nurturing parent family, parents gain authority by earning respect and respecting their children. They engage in open two-way communication, and they know, as Hillary Clinton once said, it takes a village. That is, you don't just raise a child by yourself. Your community is important in this. These family models, when they map onto politics, lead to opposite views of democracy and to opposite views of real food. And that's important for Food Day. You're going to get opposite views of what this is about. So, for example, take the market. When the market is understood in terms of strict father morality, the market is the decider. You've heard the expression, let the market decide. It's like the strict father. It's the ultimate authority. And the idea is there's no higher authority, government or science, and discipline matters. Financial discipline gives you rewards. Lack of it means that you're not getting financial rewards. Therefore, you can see why conservatives are against regulation, taxation, union or worker rights, tort cases, and why science is seen as subordinate to the market. That is, the market is seen as the ultimate authority in a laissez-faire market. You're going to be encountering this all the time because there are issues about food regulations, about taxes on certain kinds of foods, about worker rights in terms of, let's say, picking vegetables and fruits, about tort cases for suits and so on, and whether food science is going to be subordinate to the market. This is important and you need to know it. Now, under a progressive view of democracy, you have the following idea. Democracy is based on a moral principle. That moral principle is that citizens care about each other and act responsibly on that care. That is, they have both individual and social responsibility. And the role of government is to promote the public good, to empower and protect all citizens equally. And the public good requires a government that provides conditions for freedom. That is, infrastructure, roads and bridges, education, health protections, safety nets, physical protection, police forces, fire departments, a system of justice, government research, market oversight, economic stability, environmental protection, all of those things. You're not free without them. You know, if you have no roads and can't go anywhere, you're not free to travel. If you're not educated, you're not free to function in the world. If you don't have health protection and you get sick and no health insurance, you're not free. You have cancer and no insurance, you're not free. You break your leg and can't get it fixed, you're not free, and so on. All of this is about freedom, and that's a very important thing. The right is constantly talking about freedom, and you'll see why. But you're not free without all of these things. And a viable private life and private enterprise requires this kind of public provision. Nobody makes it on their own. Private enterprise requires public provisions. Conservatives see things really differently. Democracy is seen on the basic moral principle, liberty. Citizens should be free to seek their own interests, regardless of the interests of others. Responsibility is personal responsibility alone. You're not responsibility for other people, and others are not responsible for you. Those who succeed deserve to succeed. Those who don't succeed don't deserve to. And this principle imposes a moral hierarchy which should be reflected in moral and political and economic power. We see conservative moral order where you have God above man, man above nature, which is very important in environmentalism, adults above children, successes above failures, Western culture above other cultures, America above foreign nations. And most conservatives have these views. Then there are extreme versions, like Americans above foreigners, men above women, whites above non-whites, straights above gays, Christians above non-Christians, which you see in extreme conservatism. Now, when you take a governing institution as a family, and you take these various institutions, you have this, and we saw this in the market and letting the market decide. And that's how that works. When you project the strict father family, that's how it's going. Now, how does this political divide apply to Food Day? Food Day is an inherently nurturant enterprise. That is, real food connects you to the natural world, and it connects you to other people. That is, fulfillment in life requires, one, having enough food. So the issue in the Farm Bill, for example, about food stamps is a very, very real and important and crucial issue. Taste matters. That is, in fulfillment, you want to enjoy your life. You want real food that you enjoy, not real food that tastes awful. And the idea that is often put out there that real food is just going to taste bad is not true. Some real food does, just as some processed food does, and a lot of real food tastes great. And the important thing is that taste does matter. It's not just a matter of nutrition and health and public health. Taste is important. Health, of course, matters. You're not free if you're not healthy. Real food is healthy. Being sick sucks. Now, there are bad guys in this, and there are poisons. And I use the word poison, which most people don't want to use, but it's a powerful, powerful word. And this is something that people in the health field recognize. Fructose and sucrose, sucrose is half fructose, is basically poisonous. It leads to extremely bad health problems. Pesticides are poisonous chemicals that kill bugs. NGO foods very often have pesticides built into the food itself to kill the bugs, but it adds up. Trans fat is poisonous. It hurts you. It's very bad for your health, as are other high-fat foods. Chemicals that replace real foods and processed foods take away nutrients and take away other things. They may provide some artificial nutrients, but basically they take away the nutrients that are in real foods. That is bad for your health. It's kind of a form of poison. processed foods contain pesticides unless they say they are organic or pesticide-free. That's important to know. Pesticides are poisonous. Antibiotics in food are dangerous, as I'm sure you all know. Why? Because antibiotics take away the ability of your body to function against superbugs that don't work with antibiotics, and they support the development of superbugs. So it's important to understand this, and the public needs to know about what's really harmful. There are bad guys out there. Now, experiences are very important if you're going to get any ideas across. So what you want to do is give students and children experiences. For example, it's very important if you're raising a child to teach them to read labels out loud. Take the food they want. If they're eating processed food, have them read the labels out loud and notice when they come to chemicals. They're going to hit those chemicals and point out, that's a chemical, that's a chemical, that's a chemical. Notice it. You might even want to find out, go to the environmental working group and find out what those chemicals do. EWG.org. Another very important thing for children, they need to learn to cook. One way to start is at least cook oatmeal, rice, brown rice, or red or black rice, corn, like cornmeal or polenta, or just cook corn. But basically, start cooking something. Children need to learn how to cook. And they don't have to learn to cook fancy things, although, probably, macaroni and cheese will be, early. But I think it's very important. They should learn to cook something. And as they can cook more, they should cook more. Children want to help, and that's important. They can even learn to chop food and do prep. Another thing that children can do, since they like to use computers, is to go online and find some recipe for food that they like. Get a real food that they like. This is a good practice to go online and find recipes for real foods and check it out to see if it's real. Another thing that children ought to learn is where to find real food. And a useful thing, say for teachers or for parents, is to have children go to a supermarket and make a map of the supermarket to mark where the real food is and where it isn't. It's usually around the edges of the supermarket. But it's really important that they make a map so that they can go right to where the real food is and avoid the other stuff. So that is a useful exercise. There's a thing called, there's an app for your cell phone called the Good Guide app. It's free on your cell phone, Good Guide. And what it does is read barcodes on labels and tell you what is in the food and where it comes from and all sorts of important information. Kids are using cell phones good these days. Get the Good Guide app, have them go to the store, and when they get something that they're interested in eating, that is something that isn't just a vegetable or a fruit, but actually in a package, have them use the app and find out what's in the food. It's right there on the Good Guide app. I recommend it highly. Then each children should find out about plants, but plants you like to eat. Find out fruit that tastes good, vegetables that taste good, nuts and seeds, even peanuts, peanut butter, and so on. All sorts of nuts, whole grains. All these things you know, but the question is, what do people like to eat? What do children like to eat? This is important. Food is a political issue, and the reason is that, progressive values are nurtured and they lead to caring about sufficient, enjoyable, healthy food for everybody. And that says governmental responsibility for real food values. This is a governmental issue and a political issue, and it's extremely important. And it's going to show up in everyday politics, not just in electoral politics and in, going to the government. Conservative values are strict, and they lead to maximizing profit in the market over real food, personal responsibility alone, and liberty, and individuals and corporations should be ungoverned. Hence, you see the reaction against attempts to, let's say, regulate super drinks and, supersizing and so on of sugary drinks. There's going to be all kinds of reactions from this point of view from people who say, hey, I should have the liberty to do anything I want with my body, and everybody else should have that liberty, and there should be no such regulation. And then there's the Farm Bill. And if anybody is interested in the politics, that is at the heart of these things. If you don't know what's going on in Farm Bill politics, you should and you must. And if you want to find out about that, again, the environmental group, ewg.org, is a very good source. Food is an
We have about 5 minutes left, George, just so you know.
Great, thanks. We're on time. Food is an educational issue. Education is and should be a nurturant enterprise. That is, you can't learn if you are hungry, sick, or malnourished. Having enough food matters, and matters enormously in classrooms where there are poor children. Food is at the heart of human existence. It's social. It connects you to others. Food is environmental. It connects you to the natural world. When you're chopping up vegetables, you are interacting with vegetables. You know, when you're eating fruit, you're interacting with things that are growing on trees or on bushes or whatever. That is, you're interacting with the natural world, and real food is therefore a human, social, economic, and environmental issue. It's there in all of these things. And every parent and every school should be teaching about real food from all of these perspectives, because this is an environmental issue. What should you be prepared for? They're going to be attacked. You'll be attacked as the liberal elite. This is an idea created by conservatives to recruit low-income working people who have some strict father values themselves. So expect to be called foodies, and expect to be, called the sushi-eating liberals and so on. This is important, and the attack can also come from minority group liberals who are afraid that real food is not affordable to low-income people, or that it goes against certain given cultural norms. So you can expect attacks from a number of places. You can also expect to be co-opted by the processed food industry. They will try to use Food Day as their own marketing ploy. Expect, McDonald's and other places to say, hey, we serve salads, there are egg white sandwiches, high-protein burgers, etc. Expect co-optation. This is important, and that's one of the reasons it's important to talk about the bad guys. Then there are cases where you can be both attacked and co-opted. So there's an Atlantic Monthly article out this month on how science is engineering healthy junk food. It's an attack on the pollenites, pollen being mycopollen. That is, it says that the real good thing for people in nutrition is being done by the processed food industry, which is making healthier junk food. It's an outrageous thing, and it's an article that never mentions the word pesticides, never talks about what's wrong with sugar, and so on. So don't negate, stick to your frames, be positive, and get it all right. Okay? And whatever it is, don't let yourself be framed by your adversaries. Now, that's it.
Great. We have time for just a few questions. So if you have questions for George, go ahead and type them in now, and I'll read them out. We did have one question, which you sort of addressed in your last slide there. What are some of the frames that we should be avoiding when it comes to real food? What are those frames used by those working against real food?
Well, the ones working against them are going to say, one, that the processed food industry is getting healthier and healthier, and we now have healthy alternatives. There's Coke Zero, which has 0 calories, and so on. Coke is making smaller things. Therefore, Coke should be one of the sponsors of Food Day. That's a problem. You're going to get that, and you'll get co-optation like that. Or the claim that Burger King now has a double hamburger, not talking about what's in the hamburger, and assuming that this is just good protein. And they're not wrong in the sense that people who are poor may be forced to have non-real food if they're poor enough. And that does happen. It's very real and a very real issue in the families. However, there are ways in which poor people can actually eat real foods, whole grains, so on, but they have to be able to cook.
Okay, and one more question before we move to the Berkeley Media Studies Group. How do we deal with the choice frame? Conservatives say we want to maximize choice when the research shows less choice leads to healthier diet. Do you want to address that?
Yes. The idea is that because most thought is unconscious, you don't really have just free choice because there is marketing. What processed food people do is market their things so that when you think you're making a real choice, you're actually choosing what is being marketed to you. Apples are not marketed to you. Real food is generally not marketed to you, because the natural world and nature is not making profit on everything and doesn't have marketing. So the idea here is that you should make informed choice, and that's very important. That is, you need to know what's going on, and you need to understand who is marketing stuff to you and determining your choices.
Thank you so much, Professor Lakoff, and we will address some of these other questions that are being asked towards the end of the call, and if we don't get to you, we'll be sure to respond offline.
Okay,
so now I'm going to turn it over. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'll be around throughout the call.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to move on to Ingrid, Daffner, Krasnow, and Lezak, Shallat from the Berkeley Media Studies Group. Ingrid provides media advocacy training and technical assistance to public health advocates. And since joining Berkeley Media Studies Group in 2008, she's helped to develop strategic media advocacy plans, working on issues ranging from nutrition and physical activity to partner violence and language access in the healthcare system. Lezak Shallat has spent most of her professional life as a journalist and communications consultant in Central and South America. Lezak has led advocacy and information campaigns on many public health issues as well. She opened the Jackson Hole, Wyoming office of the Berkeley Media Studies Group and currently serves on the Teton County Board of Public Health. So I will turn it over to both of you.
Great. Thanks so much, Catherine, and to CSPI for hosting this webinar, and to all the participants in Food Day. This has been a really wonderful opportunity for us, both this year and in years past, to participate in this effort. And so we're really glad to be here, and also glad to be partnering with Professor Lakoff. Just as far as the technical side of things, I just want to make sure the control panel is actually showing up on my screen, but I want to make sure it's not in the way of the slides for the viewers. Catherine, could you just confirm that, please?
Yes, that's right. We can just see your slide, not the screen. If you want to minimize it, you can press that red arrow at the top. Minimize it.
Okay, thank you. So just a tiny bit about Berkeley Media Studies Group so you know who we are. We do a few different things for those of you who haven't worked with us before. We'll do research on news coverage of particular public health issues, taking a cross-section of news on an issue, and looking at how that issue is being framed in the news media, what the public conversation around that issue is, and how public health advocates can learn from that content analysis in order to establish and frame their own messages to move the conversation in the direction they want it to go. We also do training and strategic consultation, as Catherine mentioned. Both Lezak and I have experience in that. And this kind of webinar is just the kind of thing that we like to do, and we're doing more and more of that with a national audience when folks can't always travel, although we also do in-person trainings as well as one-on-one strategic consultation. And we also do professional education for journalists, with the idea that journalists and the news media in general have the ear of decision makers and really are the ones who can make or break an issue depending on the way that issue is being framed. And so we're doing our best to educate journalists and reporters so that they can really be writing their stories from a public health perspective and not just from an individual health perspective. So just the standard goals for today, the basic goals for today, I'll let you all take a look at this. But essentially, we're going to jump off from where Dr. Lakoff started and get a little bit deeper into some of the practical applications of media advocacy, moving from the theory into the practice of media advocacy, and how all of the participants on the phone related to Food Day can really apply some media advocacy strategies to advance their work. So one thing to know about Berkeley Media Studies Group and the approach that we take, we look at everything through the lens of our layers of strategy. And on the call today, because we have limited time, we're only really going to focus on that third bullet, message strategy. But I do just want to give a bit of overview of what these layers of strategy are, so that if folks have questions after the webinar or down the road, they can ask us. Essentially, what we always remind folks is that you need to know what your overall strategy is before you can start talking about your media strategy or your message strategy. And your overall strategy ultimately comes down to what's the problem that you're trying to solve, what's the solution that you have envisioned, and who has the power to make that change. And being able to answer those questions is key to knowing what are you trying to achieve. You know, oftentimes people will come to us and they have questions about, you know, I'm looking for the magic words to get my point across and that kind of thing. And we oftentimes have to step back and say, well, what are you trying to do? What is your goal? And when we ask that question, not everyone has either a really succinct answer or they haven't thought through it all the way. So we really want to encourage folks to figure out what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and really being as specific as you possibly can about that, and what's the solution. And most of the time in public health, just by the nature of public health, there are multiple solutions to a given problem, and any given problem is multi-layered and very complex. So most of the time people have to break apart those layers and really get into the specifics of each problem and each specific solution. From there, then you can think about what the media's role can be. Do you want to engage the media essentially as a vehicle for policy change, or are you really looking at trying to fly under the media radar? Maybe the issue that you're working on is something that you don't want to get a lot of media attention, and you want to do more one-on-one meetings with decision makers to be more strategic in that way. So answering that question about how you want the media to play a role is also very important. And within that, if you do decide the media has a role, you would ask yourself, what are the media outlets that my target audience or audiences is paying attention to, and what do they need to hear? The third bullet, and this is what we're going to focus on today, is message strategy. And this is essentially based on the theory that Dr. Lakoff presented around the way that people make decisions, intellectual and cognitive framing, as well as political framing. And how can we as advocates affect change through strategic messaging. And so in the message strategy, in that layer, we're going to be asking the same questions. What's the problem, what's the solution, and who has the power to make the change? But at this time, we're really going to pay a lot of attention to language and to wordsmithing that message so that it's as effective as possible. And again, we're also going to be talking about the role of values, a lot of the values that Dr. Lakoff presented in his earlier presentation. And finally, access strategy is the final point of the layers of strategy, and it really begs the question, how am I going to reach the audience that I want to reach? And if it's through the media, how am I going to reach that media outlet? How am I going to engage them to be interested in an event that I have coming up, in a new publication that I want to submit or send out, a particular policy change, advocacy effort, that kind of thing. So how am I going to engage my audience using the vehicle as a media using the media as a vehicle for policy change? So as I mentioned, message strategy asks a few specific questions. One, the very most important one, is what's the environmental perspective? So really looking at your approach from a public health or environmental perspective, thinking that, of course, we all are responsible for our individual health to a certain degree, but there are many, many systems and structures in place that impact whether or not we can be healthy. Meaning, do we have access to healthy food? Can we afford to buy healthy food? Is it the grocery store or farmer's market or food source close enough to make it realistic that we can get healthy food on a regular basis, or is it too far away that we end up needing to eat processed food that will last a long time? So really bringing that environmental perspective right up front in your message, as well as your values. So Dr. Lakoff mentioned a lot on different value sets and belief systems, and we're going to talk about that and how to incorporate messages that are very value strong. The third point is making sure the solution gets as much attention or even more than the problem. And this is a really common pitfall, especially in the public health world, that we feel very passionate about the work that we're doing, and we want to talk a lot often about the problems that we're seeing in our communities. And while this isn't inherently a problem, the issue with talking more about the problem than the solution is that sometimes, frankly, in a very practical way, you run out of time in your conversation. And the folks who you're talking to end up hearing more about the problem than the solution, and at the end of the conversation, they may not have heard the proposal that you're trying to suggest. And so really making sure that that solution gets a lot of attention. Also, we know from research that people feel sort of desperate and hopeless when all they hear about are problems, especially in the news media when we hear about problems day in and day out. We really want to focus on the solutions that we're proposing. And finally, not last but definitely not least, is who's responsible for the solution that you are suggesting? Oftentimes we hear concepts like the community needs to come together to address this problem. And while that may be true from a philosophical perspective, when we hear those blanket sort of comments, oftentimes it leaves people feeling like no one is actually being held responsible, and that people look at each other to take action, but no one is really held accountable for that action. We really want to be as specific as we can to make sure that we are naming the person or the entity who has the power to make the change that we're seeking. So again, strategic messages will answer the following questions. Essentially, what do we need, or what's the problem? Why does it matter? What happens if we don't do anything about addressing this problem? And what should be done about it? And remember, you want to think about both your messenger and your audience. So who's delivering the message as well as who's hearing it should be shaping the way that you're developing your messages. So what we're going to do now is take a few minutes to go through some sample messages to sort of highlight each of these aspects of strong messages. So this is an example that uses prevention as the primary value. Now, figuring out the values of your audience and figuring out the values of your own organizations and your own efforts is part of this messaging process. So that may be the first place that you stop after this webinar, is to go back to your organization. If you haven't done that, figuring out a handful of key values that you feel like really represent the work that you're doing and also will resonate with the audiences that you're trying to reach. So this is an example about using EBT cards at farmers markets. So we know, if we use this environmental cue, children are healthier when they eat plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables. I think that we could say that to any audience and they would agree with us. But we want to make sure that we're creating that environmental cue so that we know we want to ensure kids get enough fresh fruits and vegetables. However, when fresh produce is not available to buy with EBT cards, some families can't afford to buy it, which means some children don't get the food they need to be healthy. So that's the value there is we want to make sure that people can afford to buy the food that they need because we want to prevent any problems from happening down the road. The policy proposal that includes this goal of prevention is, or this value of prevention, excuse me, we can prevent poor health now and in the future if we accept EBT cards at our local farmers markets. So this is a way to incorporate that value into the policy solution by essentially saying, hey, we do have a way to solve this problem. Here it is, and let's do something about it. So we're going to use the same example, but move through the example with a different value set. So this is ingenuity, or that can-do spirit, this idea that, you know, we can figure out a problem. We sent a man to the moon. We should be able to figure out how to make sure that people get enough fresh fruits and vegetables. So again, children are healthier when they eat plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables. Fortunately, we have many local farmers markets that bring fresh, locally grown produce to our community. So again, this is bringing a solution that already is available to us, that can-do spirit. We've already figured this out. So then what's our policy proposal? What we need to do is implement a system that accepts EBT cards at farmers markets that can allow all children to eat a healthy diet. So again, our policy proposal incorporates that value of we have this solution and let's do something about it. And the final value that we're going to work with is fairness. So same environmental cue, children are healthier when they eat plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables. And I would almost change this, even though I wrote it, I want to feel the desire to make a quick change on this based on sort of the idea of an environmental cue. You know, it could be more effective to say something like, children are healthier when they have access to healthy fresh fruits and vegetables. Not only eating is more of an individual behavior, but we want to make sure that children actually have access. And access is much more of an environmental issue rather than an individual issue. So let's say it that way. What's the value or value of fairness? So we can say it's not fair that some children in our city have access to healthy produce while others don't. So again, bringing in that concept of access, which is an environmental issue, and the idea of fairness. We want to make sure that all children have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. So accepting EBT cards at farmers markets would allow all children to eat a healthy diet. So again, this is a way to incorporate the same policy solution but using 3 different sets of values that can reach different target audiences depending on what their values may be. We're going to spend just a moment talking about access strategy and then review some of the specifics around successes of Food Day efforts in the previous year. So one thing I want to remind folks is that this work needs to start well in advance. And so some of you may have already started thinking about your media strategies, and perhaps this webinar is actually the sort of the launch of your particular media campaign. And so if we think about this sort of as a 6-week countdown to Food Day on the 24th, we want to think about a few different aspects. We want to think about what's going on each week related to food and other related policy news, and how we might piggyback on that news. And my colleague Lezak is going to talk about piggybacking in just a moment. We also want to make sure we have our eyes on what are our specific advocacy goals. If we're holding an event, is the event meant to bring attention to a specific advocacy goal? Is it meant to bring information or awareness? What are the specific news hooks? Essentially, why are people going to be interested in the work that you're doing? Why are people going to come to your event? Why would a reporter show up? Why would they log on to your website or make a donation or get their kids involved in a program at school? So what is that hook that's going to bring people in? And then media actions, and this is really meant to describe both what does the media need to do? Do they need to show up? Do they need to write an article? Is it a response to a blog? But also, is there information that you want out there in the media that you're asking people to take action? Again, is it parental involvement? Is it asking a policymaker to take steps towards implementing a specific kind of policy? And when I say policymaker, I don't just mean folks at the state or national level, but even locally. What is your PTA doing about the food service in your schools? What are the local farmers markets doing about accepting EBT cards and making sure that food is accessible to all families? Those kinds of actions that can be at the local, state, and national level. So thinking about answers to those questions at each week of the 6-week countdown will be really effective, and keeping your eyes on the prize, using those layers of strategy to really understand the problem, the solution, and why it matters, and what ultimately is the ask that you're making through your Food Day efforts. So I'm going to pass the ball over to Lezak to talk about some specific examples on how this year's Food Day participants can learn from years past.
Okay, thank you, Ingrid, and I'll jump right in here. So now that we've looked how to frame and also how to state our messages, we're going to wrap this up by saying, how can we get them into the media? You want to make your voice heard, and you have to take your message to the media, and we have some examples here of different ways that that can be done. Just to quickly, the example here of McDonald's is actually an example of how the Center for Science in the Public Interest became the referent. And in a sense, what they did was they co-opted the co-opter by stealing the thunder. They were the go-to source for the reporter, in this case for USA Today, to comment on something that McDonald's did. So they really, in some sense, have the last word because they have established themselves as an important referent. But this is actually reactive in the sense that they did not go out and create the news. It's a wonderful place to be, but not all organizations are there. So how can you become more proactive in creating news? And will you move on to the next slide, Ingrid?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Did it go?
Yes. Okay, here we have some steps in how to become really much more proactive. And you don't have to become proactive by something that you personally have done. I mean, it's a great way, and we can talk about that later on how to create news. But just I don't know if you all remember the bumper sticker that said, "Think global, act local." Well, here we have an example of how all politics is local. There's the top clip there is from a letter that was sent to senators in 2012, calling on the Surgeon General to study the link between soda and obesity. And that is a local story in any community. And the bottom clip is from the New York Times. And it's about the health board approving a ban on sugary drinks. I actually saw this living in Chile. So it was news there because New York City is a trailblazing city. It has very forward-looking policies. And in Chile, the Congress is actually looking at labeling. So here, something that was at the other side of the earth actually made local news where I was living. So you have a lot of opportunities to look at what's going around, happening in other places and turn it into a local issue that your media will want to hear from. The media is always looking to make global issues into local ones. So that's a very good strategy to use. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, and one of the ways that you do that is to piggyback on breaking news, either news in your community or news somewhere else. And I wanted to use an example here that the Food Day community used itself. Just recently, I received a communication from Food Day on the 4th of July. And it said, when you think of the 4th of July, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Friends around a blazing grill, opportunity to declare independence from junk food. I thought that was a very creative way of linking something as seemingly far removed from Food Day as the 4th of July. And I thought they did a very good job. And I'm sure you can all have many examples in your own practice of ways to piggyback. But I did want to reflect on something that Professor Lakoff said, which is that we have an ongoing debate in Congress over the Farm Bill, which is an incredible opportunity to comment and to piggyback. I mean, there are no lack of examples right now and issues that Food Day can use to get the specific aspects, the ones that you're working on, into the news. So I took a moment before I started this presentation to go and look at some of the work that had been done around Food Day last year and some of the media advocacy that had been done. And I really discovered that people had done a very, very good job. And so I thought we could use this opportunity to learn from one another. Would you move to the next slide, Ingrid, please?
Yes.
So the Food Day site has an archive of its own of clips that the organizers put together after last year's event, and I took a look at it, and it had more than 20 examples of coverage, and it really illustrated what is being called the big tent idea of the event. I mean, everything and anything seems to have been included and done and fit very well within this concept. And one of the clips in this selection was from the Huffington Post that said that Food Day 2012 was celebrated in over 3,000 events, including events that were presided over by the likes of New York City Mayor Bloomberg, Massachusetts Governor, whose name I don't remember, and celebrities in the food and nutrition world. And since the commemoration is still new, it's, I guess, in its 3rd year, there seems to be quite an open disposition to the media to use it as an opportunity to look at all kinds of issues that are in everyone's family, everyone's kitchen, everyone's life. There is not this jaded or deaf sense from the media that there are in many other awareness days. I think that's all. Those are all opportunities that you can seize. And I just want to look very quickly at some of the things I learned from looking at this selection. And
about 3 minutes left, just to let you know.
Thank you. One of them was the piggybacking, which we spoke about. And the other is the very celebratory feeling to all of this coverage. And the other thing was that the timing is crucial to get coverage into say magazines that have a fall issue, you need to start work now. So I think we'll skip the review. You can all find the articles yourself on the issue, and we'll go straight to we'll cut to the chase here. We'll go to the next slide, Ingrid.
Okay.
And just so that we don't, we have lots of time for questions. So what are the challenges to making your stories newsworthy? Well, here's what you can do. These are basically a recap of the layers of strategy. You need to identify the problem and the solution and why it matters. You have to understand how the issue is currently framed. And you can't be afraid to name the bad guys, as Professor Lakoff says. You don't want to use your opponent's language, and you don't want to use their frames, but so you should talk clearly and name and shame. Talk about pesticides, poisons, GMOs. Get the issue out in your language. So we also believe that you should reframe anything that's presented as an individual problem into a social issue. I mean, we're looking for collective solutions. We're not only looking for individual behavior change. You must always show the solution that you want to see. If not, you may not see it translated into policy. And one way to do that is to assign responsibility and make sure that someone is accountable for the change that you're trying to see. So to wrap up, making news for the sake of making noise, it can be exciting, and it's sometimes very necessary to keep your issue visible and to bring others to your cause, and a lot of that will happen over Food Day and I think it's good. But it's not always strategic, and it is not necessarily effective just to make noise. And if you want to generate policy and systems change, so Food Day is really a great opportunity to make news that can make a difference. And I hope that we've given you some practical and useful ideas on how to go about that. So thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Ingrid and Lezak. That was very helpful. And we do have a few questions here. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the issue of values versus goals. Someone brought up a question. How do you sort of parse out the difference between a value and a goal when you're talking about these issues? So maybe you could just go back and talk a little about your slide with the policy proposal versus assigning that value, and talk about how do people identify the difference between those two things.
Sure. So it's a good question. I'm trying to find the best slide to describe that. And maybe I'll just go here. So the goal is essentially what your effort is trying to achieve. So whether that's implementing a new menu in a school system, cafeteria, or whether that's bringing farmers markets to a local community, or whether that's ensuring that there's organic produce available at the local grocery store, or taking, maybe at the federal level, reducing the amount of marketing that junk food companies can put on television. All of those could potentially be your goals, policy goals specifically. A value would be the question of why does it matter? So essentially, what happens if our kids don't have healthy food in schools? Why does that matter? So the value there, there could be a dozen different values that you can connect to it. Healthy children mean successful children in school. We know that healthy food means more focused children in the classroom. The value could be when you're talking about the marketing proposal that, it's not okay that marketing companies and that junk food companies spend billions of dollars every year marketing unhealthy food to children. So that value being fairness. So hopefully those examples offer sort of the distinction between the value and the goal being specifically the solution that you're proposing, and the value being the answer to the question, why does it matter, or what happens if nothing is done about this?
Okay, great, thank you. And sort of a follow-up to that, regarding assigning responsibility for solutions. Should you assign responsibility at the same time that you define your problem? Could assigning responsibility change or corrupt your problem definition if responsibility is interpreted as blame?
Sure, and you know, the way that you phrase these questions, and I'd be interested in Dr. Lakoff's response to this question as well, but the way that you frame your messages, you need to be taking into consideration your audience. And so you want to make sure that if you are, well, you want to make sure that when you are holding entities accountable, you are thinking about the most strategic way to get them to take action. And sometimes doing things in a more diplomatic way may be more effective. And sometimes playing the blame game and really holding folks' feet to the fire will be more effective. We know that in an example of, this isn't food related, but there's been an effort to reduce toxins that are allowed in cosmetics, including both makeup cosmetics, lipstick, blush, eyeshadow, all those things, but as well as shampoo and other kinds of shaving products for men and things like that that the environmental working group, as Dr. Lakoff mentioned, is working on. And there was a campaign, it's going on probably 13 or 14 years ago now, where the advocacy group took out an ad basically shaming the top cosmetics companies for continuing to provide cosmetics that include toxins that are very harmful, and showing that, you know, children play with makeup, they get their hands on their mom's makeup, and that could be putting our kids at risk, and do we really want children playing with makeup is just as dangerous as children playing with matches. So that was very much strategic and playing the blame game, and it got a response from the cosmetics companies who didn't like the bad press. But there may be a more strategic way to go about it that is more, we want the industry to be a partner in solving this problem, and here's a way that we want the industry to step up to the plate and take responsibility. Hoping that answered the question. Dr. Lakoff, I don't know if you have another more to add to that.
We have let's see, a few more minutes, and then we'll have to just wrap up. We're almost out of time. But for those of you who do still have remaining questions, feel free to type them in, and we will try to get back to you offline. We can refer these to our presenters, and maybe they can draft some quick responses to those we didn't get to. But we really appreciate everyone's participation. And Dr. Lakoff, if you're still there, we do have that question to address, and also there are a few more we could pose to you. Okay, so I think we're having some trouble with audio here, but we will try to get back to everyone who didn't get addressed today. And the PowerPoint presentations will be available, as well as a recording of the presentation. We'll send those in a link in a follow-up email to everyone who's registered. And we'll also post them on www.foodday.org/webinars. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank our presenters so much, Professor and Dr. George Lakoff, Ingrid Daffner Krasnow, and Lezak Shallat for presenting on our call today. And we found some really helpful information here. I hope that the audience will be able to use it, and thank you for everyone's participation today.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you.